Harlem in the 1930s did not sleep. It breathed. It pulsed with trumpet notes that slipped through open windows, with the scent of fried fish drifting from brownstone kitchens, with laughter that carried above injustice like defiance disguised as joy. Harlem was poetry wrapped in struggle, silk stitched with scars, and in the middle of it all walked a man who understood something most men never did. Power is loud. Authority is quiet. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson did not look like a king. He looked like a scholar who had memorized the streets, short in stature, deliberate in movement, had angled precisely, eyes that missed nothing. He read Shakespeare. He quoted scripture. He observed before speaking. And when he did speak, men leaned in, not because he was the loudest, but because he was the calmest. Harlem respected him, feared him sometimes, but respected him always. Yet even the most composed men carry storms inside them. And that week, the air had begun to change. Rumors had been spreading, men from outside the neighborhood stirring tension, exploiting racial hatred that still infected America like an untreated wound. Though Harlem was strong, the wider country was not kind. Extremist groups, emboldened in other regions, occasionally tested the boundaries of northern cities. They relied on intimidation, spectacle, public humiliation. They thrived on reaction. And reaction was exactly what Bumpy refused to give. That night, the Savoy ballroom shimmered under gold lights. Couples spun across polished floors. Jazz wrapped around bodies like heat. For a moment, Harlem felt untouchable. Mame Johnson stood at the top of the steps outside the Savoy, adjusting her gloves. She wore confidence like perfume. Navy dress, pearl earrings chin high. She was not simply Bumpy's wife. She was his equal in composure, educated, articulate, strong without spectacle. When Bumpy emerged behind her, he paused. He did not speak immediately. He simply looked at her. "You look like Harlem deserves better," he said gently. She smiled. "Then make sure Harlem gets it." That was their language, short sentences carrying entire philosophies. They descended the steps together, across Lenox Avenue. A black sedan idled. 3 men inside. Watching. Harlem noticed everything. But Harlem also knew when to mind its business. Bumpy noticed the sedan. He did not change direction. He did not alert Mame. He simply filed it away, because power, when secure, does not rush, but insecurity does. The sedan door opened. The tallest of the 3 men stepped out. Pale skin, hard jaw, eyes that had learned to enjoy discomfort. He carried himself like someone who believed the world owed him dominance. He was not a known Harlem figure. That was intentional. He crossed the street slowly. The music from the Savoy continued behind Bumpy and Mame, but the rhythm seemed to thin as the man approached. "Evenin'," the stranger said, his tone dipped in mock courtesy. Bumpy turned slightly. "Evening." Mame held her posture. The man looked at her, not with admiration, but with possession. Didn't know Harlem had royalty. His words were bait. Bumpy understood bait. "We don't," Bumpy replied calmly. "We have neighbors." The man smirked, and then he reached. His hand closed around Mame's wrist, not violently, but deliberately. That is how humiliation works. Slow enough to be seen, public enough to wound. Music inside the Savoy faltered. Conversations dissolved. Mid-sentence. People on the sidewalk froze. Harlem had lived through enough history to know how quickly a moment could turn fatal. Mame did not gasp. She did not pull away. She looked at her husband, and what she saw was not rage. It was calculation. Bumpy did not touch the man. He did not raise his voice. He did not look at the hand gripping his wife. He looked into the stranger's eyes. "You are holding a lady," he said evenly. The man laughed. "Looks like she's standing just fine." There it was, the cruelty disguised as humor. Across the street, a small crowd gathered. Shop owners stepped outside. Drivers left their cars idling. 2 young boys stopped bouncing a ball. Even a white nightclub owner nearby stepped forward cautiously, sensing the historical weight of the scene. This was not just a confrontation. This was a test, not of strength, of restraint. Bumpy removed his hat. That small action rippled through the crowd. Removing a hat meant seriousness. It meant respect. It meant the moment had become sacred. He handed the hat to a teenage boy beside him without looking away from the stranger. "Hold this," Bumpy said quietly. The boy nodded, hands trembling. The stranger tightened his grip on Mame, feeding off the silence. "Thought you were supposed to be somebody," he taunted. Now the tension was unbearable. Men in Harlem respected Bumpy deeply. If he struck this man, dozens would follow. The night would explode. Police would swarm. Headlines would twist. Harlem would be blamed. And that, perhaps, was the stranger's goal. Force reaction. Confirm stereotype. Justify oppression. Bumpy stepped closer, not aggressively, but intentionally. His voice lowered. "Let her go." 3 words. No threat. No raised tone. Just instruction. The stranger hesitated. He expected fury. He expected profanity. He expected the caricature he'd built in his head. Instead, he found composure staring back at him like a mirror reflecting his smallness, or what? The man challenged. The crowd inhaled collectively. This was the pivot, the point where history chooses its direction. Bumpy leaned slightly forward, close enough that only the man could fully hear him. "Or you'll prove," Bumpy said softly, "that the only thing you own is fear." Silence. 200 people stood still. The stranger's jaw tightened. He looked around. And for the first time, he realized something. He was outnumbered. Not physically. Morally. The grip on Mame's wrist loosened, just slightly. Bumpy did not seize the moment with violence. He waited. Patience is often mistaken for weakness by men who have never mastered themselves. "Let her go," Bumpy repeated. The stranger released her. It was such a small movement, but it shifted the balance of the entire street. Mame stepped back beside her husband. Bumpy adjusted her sleeve gently where it had wrinkled. No dramatic gestures. No triumph. Just restoration. Then, unexpectedly, Bumpy extended his hand. "You are in Harlem," he said calmly. "And here we part with dignity." Gasps moved through the crowd. The stranger stared at the offered hand. It was not forgiveness. It was accountability. A chance to choose manhood over cowardice. Seconds felt like minutes. Finally, reluctantly, the man shook Bumpy's hand. Brief. Tight. Public. The message was clear. You tried to humiliate. You left exposed. When the handshake ended, Bumpy retrieved his hat from the trembling boy and placed it back on his head. He turned to Mame. "Shall we?" he asked gently. She nodded. They walked. The crowd parted without instruction. Behind them, no one spoke for several long seconds. The Savoy music resumed slowly, and something extraordinary happened. Harlem did not erupt. It stood. Schultz, who had been watching from a distance, a man who understood power through intimidation, remained rooted to the spot. He had built influence through volatility, but what he witnessed was different. This was authority, born from control. That night, Harlem learned something powerful. Strength is not proven when you strike. It is proven when you don't have to. But the story did not end there, because humiliation rarely accepts quiet defeat, and the man in the sedan had not come alone. He had come with an agenda, and Harlem had just embarrassed it. The next test would not be a wrist. It would be something far more dangerous and far more public. Harlem did not forget. The night on Lenox Avenue replayed itself in whispers across barbershops, in low conversations behind beauty parlors, in murmurs beneath trumpet solos at the Savoy. People did not speak loudly about it, but they spoke deeply. They spoke about how 200 people had stood still, They spoke about how a single sentence had unraveled a public humiliation without a single fist raised. They spoke about the way dignity can sometimes wound pride more sharply than violence. Ever could. But humiliation has a way of returning. And the men in that black sedan were not accustomed to being embarrassed. 3 nights after the incident, the windows of a small black-owned bookstore on 135th Street were shattered just before dawn. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was burned. The shelves were intact. The message was not theft. It was reminder. By noon, word had reached Bumpy Johnson. He stood inside the bookstore now, hat removed, surveying the broken glass that sparkled across the wooden floor like fallen stars. The owner, Mr. Calloway, an older man with thin wire-rimmed glasses and trembling hands, tried to maintain composure but could not quite steady his breathing. "They didn't take a thing," Calloway whispered. "They just wanted to show they could." Bumpy crouched slowly, picking up a fragment of glass between his fingers. He did not react outwardly. He did not curse. He did not clench his jaw. He understood the language. This was escalation without explosion. A challenge without confrontation. They wanted retaliation. They wanted headlines. They wanted Harlem to appear unruly. Instead, Bumpy placed the glass gently into his palm and stood. "Board it up," he said calmly. "Open tomorrow like always." Calloway looked confused. "That's it?" "For today," Bumpy replied. By evening, 3 more storefronts had been vandalized. Again, no theft, just destruction. Just humiliation. And by the second night, flyers began appearing on lampposts near the edges of Harlem, printed in bold ink, filled with coded language about preserving order and restoring balance. The language was careful. It did not explicitly name hatred, but it carried its shadow. Dutch Schultz heard about it quickly. He summoned Bumpy to a private backroom in one of his establishments. Dutch was a man who respected efficiency, and what he saw happening did not look efficient. "This ain't coincidence," Dutch said bluntly, pacing near a mahogany desk. "They're testing you." "They're testing Harlem," Bumpy corrected gently. Dutch exhaled. "You gonna answer?" Bumpy adjusted his cufflinks before responding. "Yes," he said. "But not the way they expect." Dutch stopped pacing. "You don't answer strong. They'll think you're weak." Bumpy met his gaze evenly. "If I answer wrong, they win." There it was again, that strategic restraint that unsettled even powerful men. Outside, tension built like gathering thunder. Rumors spread that a demonstration was being planned, not inside Harlem, but right at its edge. A public gathering meant to intimidate. A show of numbers. A show of supposed superiority. The date circulated quietly. Saturday midnight. Near the Harlem River Bridge. It was a calculated move. Public enough to provoke. Close enough to insult. Just outside enough to avoid immediate retaliation. Harlem felt the tremor. You could see it in the way mothers hurried children home earlier than usual. In the way shopkeepers double-locked doors. In the way young men gathered in tighter circles. Anger simmering just beneath their skin, and through it all, Bumpy Johnson remained composed. He called a meeting, not with enforcers, not with muscle, but with ministers, business owners, musicians, teachers. It surprised many. They gathered inside a church basement under dim yellow bulbs. The air smelled faintly of old wood and chalk dust. "Are we fighting?" One young man asked immediately. "No," Bumpy replied. "Are we ignoring it?" "No." "Then what are we doing?" Bumpy folded his hands together. "We are going to attend." Silence fell heavy. "Attend?" Someone repeated. "Yes," Bumpy said calmly, "but not as they expect." The plan unfolded slowly. On Saturday night, instead of sending fighters, Harlem would send families, shopkeepers, musicians, church choirs. They would not carry weapons. They would carry lanterns. They would carry food baskets. They would carry hymn books. And they would stand, Not shouting. Not confronting. Standing. A quiet counter. Presence. It was audacious. It was dangerous. It was brilliant. Saturday. Arrived colder than expected. By 11:30, men dressed in pale robes began assembling near the bridge. Torches flickered. Murmured chants drifted across the water. Their numbers grew, perhaps 50, maybe more. They expected rage. They expected chaos. They expected a spark. At 5 minutes to midnight, a different glow appeared on the opposite side of the street. Lantern light. Soft. Warm. Steady. Family stepped forward together. Women in coats, men in hats, children holding hands. A church choir assembled quietly behind them. At the front stood Bumpy Johnson and Mame. No weapon. No raised voice. Just presence. Dutch Schultz watched from a distance once more, his expression unreadable. He had positioned men nearby just in case. But he did not interfere. The robed figures shifted uncomfortably. This was not the confrontation they rehearsed. No one yelled. No one advanced. The choir began to hum, low at first, then steady. A hymn about resilience, about overcoming. The sound drifted across the cold air. Torches flickered harder in the wind. The leader of the robed men stepped forward, shouting accusations into the night. Words about order, about dominance, about preserving something that did not belong to them. Bumpy did not interrupt. He waited until the shouting thinned. Then he stepped forward, lantern light reflecting off his polished shoes. "We are here," he said calmly, his voice carrying without force, because fear prefers darkness. The torches sputtered slightly. "We brought light," he continued, lifting the lantern gently. "Not to fight you, not to silence you, but to remind you that dignity does not move." The crowd behind him did not cheer. They did not clap. They simply stood. The power of 200 still bodies had once silenced a bully. Now nearly 1,000 silent witnesses stood under lantern light. The robed men shouted louder, but something had shifted. Their spectacle looked smaller against calm families. Their anger looked childish against composed adults. A young boy stepped forward from Harlem's side, holding a small American flag. He did not wave it aggressively. He held it upright. The symbolism was undeniable. The narrative was collapsing. Dutch watched closely. This was psychological warfare of the highest order, not to destroy opponents, but to expose them. The leader of the robed group faltered mid-sentence. He looked at his own men. Some avoided eye contact. The torches felt theatrical now, hollow, without violence, without insult, without confrontation. Their intimidation dissolved. Choir's humming grew stronger. Wind carried the sound across the bridge. One by one, the robed figures began stepping backward, not fleeing. Retreating. By 12:30, the torches dimmed. By 1 o'clock, the bridge was nearly empty. Harlem did not chase. Harlem did not taunt. Harlem remained standing. Bumpy lowered his lantern slowly. He turned to Mame. "It's done," he said quietly. Tears glistened in the eyes of elders nearby. Young men who had arrived ready to fight now felt something deeper, pride without bloodshed. Schultz approached slowly once the area cleared. "You could have made it ugly," Dutch said. Bumpy adjusted his hat. "But then it would belong to them," he replied. Dutch studied him for a long moment. "You don't win by force," Dutch said finally. Bumpy's expression softened slightly. "You win by refusing to become what they need you to be." The bridge that night did not witness violence. It witnessed restraint, so powerful it dissolved aggression. The newspapers the next morning struggled to spin the story. There were no arrests, no brawls, no damage, just photographs of lanterns and families standing across from robed men who looked suddenly uncertain. The headline read, "Harlem responds with hymns." And across the city, something shifted, because intimidation depends on reaction, and Harlem had denied it. But humiliation, especially public humiliation, breeds desperation, And somewhere in the shadows, the men who organized that demonstration were not finished. They had lost a spectacle. They would now seek something more personal, something closer, and far more dangerous. The calm before the next storm had begun. The lanterns had gone out, but the message had not. For 3 days after the bridge, Harlem walked differently, not arrogantly, not triumphantly, but upright. There is a subtle shift that happens when a community survives humiliation without surrendering to hatred. The shoulders rise, the eyes steady, the conversations deepen. But humiliation has a darker sibling. Revenge. And revenge does not hum hymns. On the 4th night, just past midnight, a brick shattered the front window of a small apartment building on 132nd Street. No one was hurt, but taped to the brick was a note. No names, no symbols, just a message written in heavy black ink. You embarrassed us. The paper trembled in the hand of the building superintendent when he showed it to Bumpy the next morning. This was no longer a performance at the bridge. This was closer. Personal. Calculated. Bumpy stood in the hallway of the building, sunlight cutting through cracked glass and dust in narrow beams. He read the note twice. Then he folded it carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. They want you angry, Dutch Schultz said later that afternoon when Bumpy visited him privately. Dutch's tone carried less bravado than usual. He was unsettled. They want control, Bumpy corrected quietly. Dutch leaned back in his chair. Same thing. No, Bumpy replied evenly. Anger is loud. Control is quiet. Dutch studied him. You really think they're done with bricks? Bumpy's eyes lifted slowly. No. That same evening, something happened that shifted everything. Mame did not return home at her usual hour. At first, it seemed like simple delay. She had stopped by a friend's house, then the church, then the market. But when an hour became 2, and 2 became 3, the air inside their brownstone thickened. Bumpy did not panic. He did not shout. He did not send men into the streets blindly. He sat waiting, listening, because panic is what the reckless hope for. Then the telephone rang. The voice on the other end was disguised, not theatrical, but intentionally flattened. You like standing still? The voice asked. Let's see how still you stay now. Click. The line went dead. No demand. No instructions. Just threat. Bumpy stood slowly from the chair. Across town, Dutch received a call from one of his informants, a woman matching Mame's description had been seen forced into a black car near the edge of the neighborhood, not violently, but firmly, public, enough to be seen, controlled enough to avoid chaos. The strategy was evolving. They had studied him. They knew he would not react to storefronts or demonstrations. So now they reached for what anchors him. Bumpy did not assemble an army. He assembled information. He visited the street where Mame had last been seen. He spoke with a fruit vendor who had watched the car. He asked about direction, speed, license plate fragments. Even the smell of the engine. Details matter when rage must not. 2 boys who had been playing stickball recalled something unusual. The car had a cracked taillight that flickered when braking. That was enough. Dutch pressed his own network quietly. Within hours, they traced a car matching that description to a warehouse near the Harlem River docks, a building previously rented under a false name weeks earlier. It had been prepared. This was not spontaneous. It was orchestrated. Dutch looked at Bumpy. This ain't bridge theatrics. This is war. Bumpy's face remained steady. No, he said softly. This is desperation. They drove toward the docks as midnight approached. No caravan. No flashing anger. Just 2 cars. Inside. The first sat Bumpy. Inside the second, Dutch, restless, volatile, ready for violence if needed. The warehouse loomed against the dark water, its windows dimly lit. Bumpy stepped out alone. Dutch grabbed his arm. You don't walk in there solo. Bumpy met his eyes. If I bring force, they win. Dutch hesitated. This was madness or genius, or both. Bumpy walked to the warehouse door and knocked. 3 times. Measured. Deliberate. The door creaked. Opened slightly. A man stood inside, not the bridge leader, but someone lower. Nervous. Sweating. Where is she? Bumpy asked calmly. The man tried to posture. You think you still in control? Bumpy did not blink. No, he replied. I know I am. The door opened wider. Inside, Mame sat tied to a chair, not harmed, but restrained. Her posture was still upright. Her eyes were steady, and standing behind her was the man from Lenox Avenue, the one who had grabbed her wrist. His pride had never recovered. You embarrassed me, the man said sharply. You made me small. Bumpy stepped inside slowly, the warehouse door closing behind him. You made yourself small, Bumpy replied. The man's jaw tightened. You think standing calm makes you strong? No, Bumpy answered. It makes me free. The room was heavy with tension. Dutch waited outside, hand near his coat, pulse racing. Inside, the man circled Mame slowly. I could hurt her, he said. Right now. Yes, Bumpy replied. The calmness unsettled him again. No screaming, no threats. You want me to become what you are, Bumpy said softly, so you can feel justified. The man hesitated. That's not why you took her, Bumpy continued. You took her because the only way you know how to feel powerful is by stealing someone else's peace. The words hit harder than fists. Silence filled the warehouse. Bumpy stepped closer, not rushing, and spoke one final sentence. Can untie her and walk out a man, or you can stay and prove you never were one. The man's breathing grew uneven. This was the turning point, not a gun, not a strike. Choice. The other men in the warehouse shifted uncomfortably. They had expected confrontation, shouting, chaos. Instead, they were witnessing exposure. Slowly, almost reluctantly, the man stepped forward and cut the rope binding Mame's wrists. He did not look at Bumpy. He could not. Mame stood calmly. Bumpy did not rush to her. He waited. The man stepped back. You think this is over? He muttered. Bumpy adjusted his hat. It was over when you realized you needed this. Then something extraordinary happened. The man stepped aside, cleared the path. Bumpy walked too. Mame. He offered his arm. She took it. They walked toward the door together. Dutch stood outside, stunned as they emerged unharmed. No gunfire. No screams. No bodies. Just silence. Inside the warehouse, the men remained frozen, because the loudest humiliation is not defeat. It is being offered dignity you don't deserve. The next morning, no newspaper reported the incident. No one boasted. No retaliation occurred. But something changed permanently. The vandalism stopped. The flyers disappeared. The intimidation evaporated. Because the strategy had collapsed. They had tried humiliation. They had tried spectacle. They had tried fear. And each time, Bumpy had refused to react the way hatred required. That night at the docks, the city held its breath, and when it exhaled, Harlem stood taller than ever. Dutch approached Bumpy later that week. You scare me sometimes, Dutch admitted quietly. Bumpy looked out over Lenox Avenue. Why? Because you fight without fighting. Bumpy smiled faintly. That's the only fight worth winning. Harlem did not celebrate the warehouse. There were no parades, no public speeches, no whispered boasts in smoke-filled rooms. The city had grown used to noise following conflict, but this time there was only a strange, steady quiet. The vandalism stopped completely. The men in the black sedan vanished. The flyers disintegrated like cheap paper always does when exposed to light. But silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is preparation. And Bumpy Johnson understood that better than most. The warehouse incident had not simply ended a threat. It had humiliated an ideology. It had forced men who thrived on spectacle to confront themselves without the shield of chaos. And humiliation, when swallowed rather than avenged, either matures into humility or ferments into something more dangerous. A week after the docks, a letter arrived. No return address, thick envelope, cream paper. It was not a threat, it was an invitation. A meeting had been arranged, private, neutral territory, at a midtown hotel ballroom reserved under a business pretense. The message was simple: let U.S. settle this properly. Dutch Schultz was furious when he heard. "This is a trap," he said flatly. "Nobody who loses face that publicly asks for polite conversation." Bumpy folded the letter neatly and placed it inside his coat. "Men who lose publicly need privacy to recover," he replied calmly. "You trust them?" "No." "Then why go?" Bumpy's gaze drifted to the window overlooking Lenox Avenue, where children played as if history had not tried to bruise them. "Because if I don't," he said softly, "they'll try something louder." The ballroom was elegant in the way midtown rooms always were: high ceilings, crystal chandeliers, polished marble floors reflecting gold light. It was the kind of place built to look untouchable, separate from the realities that pulsed in Harlem. Only miles away, 3 men waited at a long oak table. One of them was the man from Lenox Avenue. His face was thinner now, pride worn down by public failure. Beside him sat 2 businessmen, well-dressed, respectable, the type who hid cruelty behind legal language. This was the evolution. No more robes, no more torches. Now came contracts. When Bumpy entered, he did so alone. No entourage, no visible protection. He removed his hat as he always did in serious rooms, and took a seat without invitation. The man from Lenox Avenue did not speak first. One of the businessmen did. "Mr. Johnson," he began smoothly, "we believe recent misunderstandings have escalated unnecessarily." Bumpy did not respond immediately. He studied the room, the exits, the body language, the tension between the 3 men. "Misunderstandings," Bumpy repeated evenly. "Yes," the businessman continued. "There are economic opportunities near the Harlem, river development projects, investments. Certain groups are concerned about influence." There it was, not hatred alone, control of land, control of money, control of narrative. "You want Harlem smaller," Bumpy said calmly. "We want it orderly," the man replied. "The language of oppression rarely changes. It simply changes." "Suits." The 3rd man slid a document across the table. "A proposal. If Bumpy publicly stepped back, reduced his influence, encouraged cooperation, softened community resistance, there would be funding for certain businesses, improvements, quiet partnerships, and the intimidation would cease permanently." It was not framed as a bribe, it was framed as progress. The room grew still. The man from Lenox Avenue finally spoke, his voice strained but steadier than before. "You like dignity?" he said. "Fine, sign this. Everyone wins." Bumpy's fingers rested on the edge of the paper. This was the most dangerous moment of all. Not a warehouse, not a kidnapping, not a torch. This was compromise disguised as peace. Because sometimes injustice does not scream. It negotiates. Bumpy leaned back slowly. "You mistook something," he said quietly. The businessmen exchanged glances. "You believe Harlem stood on that bridge because of me." A pause. "They stood," he continued, "because they understood themselves." The man from Lenox Avenue scoffed lightly. "You think pride pays bills?" "No," Bumpy replied. "But selling it costs everything." Silence deepened. The businessman's voice sharpened slightly. "You refuse, and this tension resumes, perhaps more aggressively." Bumpy stood. He did not slam the table. He did not tear the contract. He simply pushed it back across the oak surface. "If you build anything near Harlem," he said calmly, "it will stand on partnership, not pressure. And it will not be purchased with intimidation. The chandelier lights seemed colder now. The man from Lenox Avenue rose halfway from his seat. You think you still control this? Bumpy met his eyes one final time. No, he answered evenly. I never did. Control is fragile. Respect is not. He placed his hat back on his head and walked toward the exit. No guards stopped him. No threats followed. Because the turning point had already passed. He had named the real battle. It was never about fear. It was about who gets to define worth. Weeks passed. Construction rumors faded. Instead, something unexpected occurred. A coalition of black and white business owners, quietly inspired by the bridge and the warehouse, approached. Harlem leaders with genuine investment proposals. Transparent terms, shared ownership, no hidden clauses. Dutch Schultz, watching from his usual distance, shook his head in disbelief one evening. You turned enemies into caution signs, Dutch muttered. Bumpy smiled faintly. I turned noise into exposure, but the true climax had not yet come. It arrived on a Sunday afternoon at the Savoy Ballroom. The place was packed. Music swelled under golden light. Families danced. Children laughed. The atmosphere felt lighter than it had in months. Then the doors opened. The man from Lenox Avenue stepped inside. No robe, no arrogance, no entourage. Just a suit. The music faltered slightly as people recognized him. 200 memories resurfaced instantly. He walked forward slowly until he stood near the center of the floor. Bumpy watched from a nearby table. Mame's hand rested calmly in his. The man cleared his throat. No microphone, no script. I came, he said, voice carrying through stillness, to say I was wrong. The air froze. I thought strength was domination, he continued. I thought fear proved control. But what? I saw what you showed. His eyes flicked briefly toward Bumpy. It made me realize something. He swallowed. I was smaller than the people I tried to belittle. No applause followed, only silence, the purest form of accountability. He did not ask forgiveness. He did not beg acceptance. He simply nodded once and walked back toward the doors, and as he left, something extraordinary happened. No one shouted. No one chased. No one mocked. They simply watched him go, because dignity, once demonstrated consistently, becomes contagious. Dutch leaned toward Bumpy quietly. You didn't beat him, Dutch said. Bumpy's eyes remained on the dance floor as the music slowly resumed. No, he replied softly. He beat himself. The trumpets swelled again. Couples returned to motion. The Savoy breathed, and Harlem stood taller than it ever had, not because it had crushed an enemy, but because it had refused to become one. That was the final lesson. Power changes its name. When it matures, it stops calling itself dominance, it starts calling itself restraint. Years later, people would remember the bridge. They would remember the warehouse. They would remember the contract pushed back across polished wood. But most of all, they would remember the stillness. 200 people standing completely silent. 1,000 lanterns glowing without rage. A city choosing dignity over destruction. And at the center of it all stood a man who understood that the loudest victory is not the one that echoes. It is the one that restores. Bumpy Johnson never claimed to be perfect. He never pretended the world was fair. But he proved something timeless. When injustice demands you lose your composure. Keeping it is revolution. And on that final Sunday, as the Savoy lights shimmered and Harlem danced again, power no longer wore a mask. It wore a calm expression, and it walked home with its head high.